You've ever heard that, like, old expression, or, like, continue to hear it today? Like, it's probably not even an old expression, it's probably a new expression, actually. Well, not new, but you still hear it. Like, I still hear it. I hear it being used all the time, like, an analogy or, like, a phrase. I just, like, I've heard it so many times, it just, like, fucking pisses me off. It just annoys me. You know, something along the lines of, you can take a horse to water, you can lead it to water, but you can't make it drink. For the longest amount of time, I was like, what does that even mean? Like, isn't the point of, like, one of these, like, expressions, like philosophical phrases or whatever you want to call it, like idioms, if that's what it's called, I'm sure, meant to be, like, self-explanatory? Like, why do we need an explanation for it? Shouldn't it be able to be understood on its own? Like, when you say the sentence, okay, when you say the statement itself, like, I'm able to understand exactly what you mean. Like, shouldn't that be basic when you're doing stuff like this? Like, why... You know, I hated it. It's like that phrase, having your cake. You want to have your cake and eat it too. Like, what does that even mean? Like, you want to have, like, it means, like, you want to have a cake, but if you eat it, you won't have it anymore. So you want to be able to, like, you know, there's a perfectly good substitute expression for this, right? You want to go swimming, but you don't want to get wet. Like, that's self-explanatory, right? You want to do a thing, but you don't want to, you know, deal with the consequences of that thing, right? Like, that's basic shit. Like, why are you using such a specific phrase that does not explain itself? I don't know. But I guess what people mean when they say, like, because I looked it up, obviously, I have no idea otherwise what you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink would even mean. It's like, you can make circumstances ideal for a person to do something, right? Like, live a certain lifestyle or whatever. Or, you know, you can prohibit certain activities, right? Make things unlawful or whatever. But fundamentally, like, you're not changing that person's mentality, the mindset that makes them want to commit, like, makes someone, like, do illegal things in the first place. So you can't really do that, right? It's like, you know, you can take someone out to a restaurant or a bar or whatever, and you can get them, like, some alcohol, but you can't really make them drink, right? They don't like alcohol. They're against alcohol for religious, political, or social purposes, or health purposes, or whatever. Like, you can't really do it. Like, you can't do anything with that, right? Like, why are you even taking them out to do this, right? Like, what a jerky thing to do, right? You know. So I get what the expression means. I mean, it's a terrible expression. It's a terrible... You know what you could have just said instead? You can make things easy for people to do something, but if their mentality is the same, then their mentality is the same. You know? Like, why don't you just say that? Just like, you can change one's environment, but you can't change one's mindset. You know, it actually kind of reminds me of, like, that old expression, right? You can take the man out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the man, right? You know, it's like, oh, you can take the boy off the horse, but you can't take the cowboy off the man out of the man, or I don't know, some expression like that. You know, because people are always going to have this spirit inside them, this, like, mentality or, like, view or, like, belief or set of beliefs or whatever. Like, they're always going to, like, believe a certain thing and act in a certain way and etc. Like, you can change their environment. You can take them to a different country. You can take them to a tropical island, or, like, put them in the Brazilian rainforest or whatever. But, you know, they're still fundamentally, internally the same. You know, like, you can only do so much with their mentality, is basically what I'm saying. And, like, that there is self-evidently true. Like, no one's really denying that, at least not anyone I've seen ever do. You know, you can talk about, like, social engineering, but that means you have to have an environment which produces the kind of mentality, the kind of mindsets that you want in the first place. You can't just change things as they are. And that's a hard pill to swallow for conservatives and reactionaries and rightists in general. It's a really hard pill to swallow, because they want, like, all these changes which fundamentally go against the common consciousness, the common echoed sentiments and beliefs of the general public. You know, what constitutes the consensus, what most people, the vast majority of Americans, believe, right? You know, it's like, imagine if you got a white ethno-state tomorrow, a horrible thing. I'm obviously against, like, casting out all people of color because of their genes. What the fuck? You know, it's messed up as shit. But I'm saying, even if you got that scenario somehow, who knows how, like, every white person in America would almost everyone, right? Like, virtually everyone would despise it, would be disgusted by it. You know, like, you complain about liberals and the things they say now. Imagine this society. Imagine how much outrage there would be. Like, no one would agree with it. And you wouldn't even be able to have your, like, nice white community or whatever, because you'd just be in a society of self-hating white people. In fact, they'd hate themselves even more now, considering what white people have done to people of color, you know, forcing them out of America, their homes. Like, what the fuck? You know, I don't think that's a ideal scenario for anyone. Like, why don't you just like move to like like a city or town that is like virtually entirely white? There are like thousands across the United States, thousands in every single state. Just like no self-responsibility whatsoever, no ability to take your own life into your own hands, like none of that. Just like blaming everyone else, victimhood mentality, which is ironic. You know, the right claim to be against that. Just really stupid, immature, and just evil and racist behavior. You know, I don't even know what to say. Really, there's nothing more to add there. But see, here's the thing. There is something that rightists are actually correct about, which is this vague abstraction. They don't elaborate on it enough, but nobody really does. That is self-responsibility. Now, they don't take self-responsibility all the time. Absolutely not. They just like to look at what other people are doing and blame other people and, you know, etc., right? They're the kind of man-children. But, you know, fundamentally, this idea, like, let's say we're talking about drugs, right? We're talking about narcotics, you know, intoxicants and so on, right? It's like these things are self-evidently bad, according to science, according to medical experts, according to history and every study ever conducted, you know? Maybe you could find like one or two good things about a certain drug, like maybe it has this like one chemical benefit, this one biological benefit, but at the end of the day, it is a net negative, like a vast net negative. Every drug, even the seemingly most harmless ones, right? Even the most like, you know, relaxed ones like marijuana or alcohol or anything like that, right? Not good for you at all. So the truth is like, people will say stuff like, you know, I feel that it's not just a victimless crime. It's not a victimless vice, because a lot of the time drugs heighten and like that massively emphasize bad behaviors in people, like behaviors that we would call mentally ill. I wouldn't use the term mentally ill, but you know, disorderly basically, right? And that results in a lot of disorderly conduct, to use the legal term, but even just the social term, it is conduct that is disorderly, absolutely. And so you get this phenomenon where people talk about like how, especially if you know what's going on, well, what's been going on forever, really, in Los Angeles, right? And like a lot of places in Southern California, with like all these homeless people, and they do so much drugs. I'm not sure if it's the drugs that cause them to be homeless, or them doing the drugs that keeps them homeless. I don't even know, but it's probably a mixture of both, honestly. But you know, you get all that kind of disorderly behavior from these really eccentrically behaved people, right? People who clearly, even if they got into any kind of job or they stopped being homeless, they would not be allowed to work in blue-collar jobs or office jobs or any jobs involved in the arts, obviously, right? Not when it comes to social interactions, frequent social interactions with other people, with other human beings. No, they couldn't do that at all. They're just too eccentric, too bizarrely behaved and abnormal in their conduct that they could never be incorporated into normal positions, let alone academia or anything academic level, right? Anything beyond sweeping a goddamn broom in the back of a warehouse. So gets to the kind of the problem, right? Is that like it's permanent, the damage that these drugs do to their brain, or they're at least long-lasting, and it will be effectively permanent anyway if they continue subsist on doing the drugs, right? Keep doing it, rotting their neurology literally, and just mentally dying, you know, physically too. And it's a horrible phenomenon, and you know, being around them too is for pretty much everyone not a pleasant experience, right? Being around people who are this eccentric and this a lot of the time aggressive, and who just not very pleasant. But it's like, you know, it's like I remember this statement. It was like it was on Reddit, right? It was just some like just on some subreddit, and people were talking about how like the transit system in Japan, specifically Tokyo, is kind of advanced. It's kind of cool, right? It's like it's able to have a massive model share in the city, massive model share in terms of riders, the ridership, the sheer amount of people that use it every day on a daily basis for work, for recreation, for going between cities in this, you know, in the Tokyo metropolitan area, etc., right? All that kind of cool stuff. It's like, wow, that's so much more advanced than, you know, like a car, or like it's so much more dependable and reliable than a car, despite the fact, you know, you would think, well, it's not private transportation, right? You don't own your own transportation, so how could a train be able to do that? How could trains like this work? But really, it's because they don't get stuck in traffic or have to mess with other vehicles, other cars, or anything like that. That's the beauty of trains, and the fact that they're separated, right? They run on their own rail lines. That's what a train is, right? Fundamentally, all trains are separated. That's what makes them so reliable. They're always on time. It's just nice, right? And people also talk about, they compare like what it's like to be on the train, right? They compare like the cleanliness of the train, right? It's like, oh, it's a nice, polite, quiet society. You know, Japanese society is known for being relatively polite, right? Obviously, there are plenty of exceptions, plenty of assholes out there, but, in general, right, well-behaved people. And this person on this, like, thread on Reddit was like, I love, the Japanese, everyone was talking positively about the Japanese train system. But like, oh, I love, the stations in Tokyo. I love how it's, like, nice and clean and well-kept, and it's totally addict-free, right? Like, there's no addicts, And that comment got, like, mad downvoted. There was someone beneath the comment who replies, like, was addict-free, adding that really necessary? Yes, it was. What in the cock-sucking, dick-fondling... What? Like, no shit. No shit being on public transit with a bunch of people who are taking, like, a fuck ton of meth, and might even be taking the meth while on the train. I mean, there's videos of that out there. Holy shit. Like, that's not a pleasant experience, especially if they stop behaving erratically and aggressively. They agitate the driver of the train. They agitate the people aboard it. They make public transit and just getting to work and going places feel unsafe. And sometimes it's not even just a feeling. Sometimes literally unsafe. And that pushes people to spend heaps of money on, like, motor vehicles, like cars or something like that. Money they don't need to spend. And pushes people away from this great system that's being set up in Tokyo, right? Or whichever city has really great train systems, right? There's plenty of cities out there that do. Plenty of cities in America as well. It's like, that's horrible behavior. Dare I say it should even be criminalized. Like, taking drugs on public transit, straight to jail, in my opinion, right? It's a terrible fucking thing to do. But also that we have laws. There's laws in every U.S. state regarding disorderly conduct. You can't be too disorderly in public. That doesn't mean that the First Amendment doesn't apply. Of course it applies. How would it not? Obviously, free speech is okay, but when you begin scaring others, right, you begin being a public menace and a nuisance, and you make people feel unsafe, and sometimes actually make them unsafe, right? And you discourage them walking certain places or being in certain places, or they feel threatened. It's like, it's the equivalent of saying, I'm going to kill you, or I'm going to kill your entire family, or it's like a death threat. That stuff is illegal for a reason. Yes, certain speeches need to be banned. Certain speech, certain, vocal behavior and physical behavior and all that kind of stuff. All that stuff is horrible and should be banned. It's like, there's a reason that disorderly conduct laws exist, okay? And that's exactly the thing, right? Amendments in the Constitution, whichever amendment we're talking about, are meant to be templates, guidelines for correct conduct. Sort of like how Google had "Don't be evil" as their motto. It's the general idea of what you're supposed to aim for, right? To protect this general idea. It doesn't mean there can't be exceptions or it has to be followed 100%, the most literal and possible interpretation ever. That's a bit ridiculous, okay? But it is a template, a guideline for going generally in the right direction. And in a sense, when you think about that, every amendment in the Constitution has its purpose. It has some good, even if there's some bad about it, we can remove the bad and just keep the good. That's a pretty reasonable, rational thing that I think that, like, a lot of Americans believe that, actually. I don't think there's anything unreasonable about that, personally. But yeah, that's the thing, like, how are you offended by someone saying, hey, I'm glad that there are no addicts on the trains? Like, you rarely ever see any addicts in Tokyo who are on public transportation. What possible reason would you have to be offended by that? Are you an addict? Were you an addict? Were you shooting up heroin on on like one of those fast electric trains in Tokyo? Were you doing that on the rail system? I mean, what mentality do you even have to have? Could you even to even say shit like that? That's absurd. I don't even know where that comes from. Well, okay, I can take a guess. I think that a lot of people on the left, or who think they're on the left anyway, leftist identified at least, think that equality means being egalitarian unconditionally. Just like someone who calls himself a constitutionalist might believe that following the Constitution means following it unconditionally. Like, I always have to have the most straightforward, literal, blunt interpretation of what this amendment means, word for word, the most, strict interpretation. And there can't be any nuance, there can't be any, cultural, historical observations, context that's necessary. Just the first thing that comes into my mind, what this amendment in the Constitution means, that must apparently be it. And there's, no say. That's ridiculous, right? And by the way, these people who identify as leftists are obviously hypocrites. They don't support equality among many groups, many demographics, and many people, and many beliefs, and so on, But anyway, when it comes to stuff like this, they think it's, discrimination to say, I don't think you should be shooting heroin on the train. even though it's intrusive to everyone else and it puts them at risk. It's like secondhand smoke, something that should always be illegal, right? Smoking in so many places, in so many countries, in so many cities, like public smoking, forcing other people to inhale the fumes of your cigarette smoke, that should be illegal. It's akin to murder. There are like around 1 million people, or less or more depending on the study, right? They say every year globally that die as a result of secondhand smoke. So that's not a victimless crime if other people are dying because of your terrible vices, is it? No, of course it's not. This is not equivalent to like lighting a cigarette in the middle of a forest and then making sure it's out so it doesn't cause a forest fire, right? No one else is around, no one inhaling the smoke, the smog, But this is the same thing. People understand why this behavior should be banned. The same way that people generally understand why disorderly conduct, certain public expressions should be illegal. It's messed up. It harms other people. I'm all for people being legally allowed to do what they want, in their own rooms by themselves. That's freedom. That's what America is founded upon. I get it. That's individualism. I'm not trying to take away people's liberties when they don't harm anyone else. That's what distinguishes me from a rightist, someone who actually is genuinely mad at people being happy and doing things they want to do, as opposed to the way that the conservative reactionary whoever wants them to do it, But here's the thing. They're stating, I'm glad there are no drug addicts on public transportation. If that is a controversial statement, you really need to begin to examine your life. Examine your priorities. Examine why you say and believe the things that you do in the first place. What incentive you would even have to be disgusted at someone being disgusted by that horrible behavior. This is not someone saying someone who smokes a little weed or who snorts a little fucking cocaine or whatever, should just be like, just life imprisonment or some messed up shit. I don't even believe any amount of imprisonment is right. Rehabilitation would be good to an extent, I don't mean like forced rehabilitation, that's imprisonment, but offering people rehabilitation programs and offering a way out of homelessness and a variety of things. And even Finland is doing this to an extent, right? I've heard successfully. I haven't really looked into it that much and I don't really care. It's not only my field of interest. But whatever it is to do the right thing, that's good for homeless people, good for addicts, making them former addicts. They're no longer addicts. That's the point. But if you're just against anyone like saying, I don't like that these people are doing this stuff in public, then they're always going to stay addicts. Like, it feels like you want them to stay addicts. They have no incentive to improve. It's never their fault. There's no such thing as self-responsibility. That's the problem. And so sometimes, like, people who identify as conservatives, you see this a lot with American conservatives, right? And even the individual politicians of the Republican Party, they talk about self-responsibility a lot. Hypocritically, obviously, they're not going to take responsibility themselves. But when they do apply it to other people, all the time they're not wrong. Like, you should take responsibility for the things that you want in your life. You should focus on you. You should focus on doing the right thing and stop saying like, oh, it's totally like, it's their life is affecting me in every way. Just do the right thing for you, and you should be all that matters. And the people in your family and your spouse and your friends, even, whatever you need to do for yourself or for them, right? If they want the help anyway, they consent to it. So, dude, it's like self-responsibility is fundamental to person. If you can't have self-responsibility, you can't grow as a person, right? If I had no concept of self-responsibility, why do you think I've changed my ideology, my opinions, my beliefs so many goddamn times, right? And here's the thing though, self-responsibility does not mean like, oh, you can't, things can't be out of your control sometimes, or a lot of the time. A lot of the time, they are out of your control, absolutely. And things go wrong for reasons that are other people's fault, or nobody's fault at all. They're just part of nature, unfortunately. The world is a cruel place, but that's how it is, I guess. And that sucks. That totally sucks chicken dick. Obviously, I'm not saying take responsibility for things that aren't your fault. Not at all. I'm saying do what makes sense. Do what is logical. So here's the thing, right? You can change your environment, but you can't, but your mentality, only you can change that. You know what I mean? Only you can change what you believe. No one else can influence you in that way, right? Like, you can give a bunch of homeless heroin addicts, meth addicts, whatever drug they're doing, right? You can give them shelter. You can give them housing. You can give them far less harmful alternatives to the crazy jazz, the crazy drugs that they're doing, right? They're taking. but fundamentally you can't change their mentality. You know what I mean? Because if they still want to do the drugs, if they don't want to get a job, if they don't want to pay for the roof over their head, if they don't want to be functioning, contributing members to society, that's not your fault. That's their fault. They could have taken this self-responsibility. They could have done the right thing. They could have been a mature, sane, healthy person, but they chose to continue to be eccentric. And that sucks for everyone involved. That's a horrible thing, you know? So yeah, you can take the horse to water, but there's not much you can do about making it drink, right? And when it comes to vices like this and like horrible shit and all this is even more emphasis on why I support panarchy, you know, why I'm a panarchist. Because getting rid of, having a society where drugs are illegal, all of them, right? That's a great society. Not having to live amongst other people who make society harmful, you know, amongst homeless people, amongst people who are, who commit disorderly conduct and are poorly behaved, right? Having some kind of standard for your fucking society, right? Having there be a list of qualifications you need, some bare minimum standards to get into the territory, okay? And be able to live in that territory amongst people similar to yourself, who have good values, good, strong cultural and community values, and who don't do drugs, and who don't misbehave on public transit, and yada, yada, yada. You know, all this stuff. Basic stuff. But I'm not taking away anyone's freedom, and I'm definitely not arguing. I'm arguing the opposite for closed borders. I want open borders. But that doesn't mean that anyone can just get into any society, because it's democracy, or at least to an extent. The government or the people choose who gets into a society, who is allowed into this society, right? You know, and these societies would not be as big as fucking countries, let alone continents. They'd be the size of individual cities, and they'd allow people to move in and move out at free will, you know, by their own choice, depending on what they value, you know, depending on the kind of laws they want to see in their society, the environment they want to live in. And living in that different kind of environment produces a different kind of mentality, you know, typically speaking, because being in that environment, being socially engineered, you could say, is going to produce different mental and psychological results, just as homelessness is going to produce eccentric results and eccentric behaviors, let's just say. This is why you should support each society for each different kind of person. In these, like, societies, these divisions of the world, of course, the vast majority of people could get into the vast majority of territories, right? Almost all, like, when you look at an individual person, the average person's qualities, they could access almost all of them. But some are more restricted than others. And that's okay. Like, that's not a problem, you know? People are going to choose, you know, you want a society that is all conservative or all liberal or all progressive, whatever you want. That's the beauty. I mean, we wouldn't have to have this conversation. Wouldn't have to have this problem if people could just accept that some people are going to be different. Some people have no tolerance for bad behavior. Some people have no tolerance for drug addicts and people who misbehave publicly, okay? And that's okay. You shouldn't have tolerance for these fucking people. Not everything should be tolerated. And so many people who claim to be on the left don't understand this. They think that every kind of bad behavior needs to be tolerated. Here's the thing. You don't want intolerance. You don't want people who think differently. You don't want people who to ever discriminate. Not that they ever should discriminate, but, you know, who don't want to, like, live with these people. You create separate societies for them. You look at all this behavior that many people label degenerate, you know, going against basic morality, right? Basic, decent social norms. And you allow for these people who are against that behavior to have their own society where they get to exclude such people. And why would you want to live amongst these judgmental people anyway, right? Like, literally, it's good for every person. You know, this is what I mean. Like, these societies benefit from one another. Like the concept of a black ethno-state and a white ethno-state. No one who's truly for the Third Reich could ever be against Liberia. So that's my whole point. You know, it's like segregated schools, right? I'm against that, obviously, but if you're in different small, well-kept societies, it'd be a different scenario, different whole fucking thing, right? And that's the thing. The U.S. has more pluralism than any other country in the goddamn world. The sheer amount of differences between states and really counties, even independent cities as well. That's the whole beauty of it, right? Different laws, different approaches to laws, different ways the justice system handles its judgments and casts judgments and sentences to criminals and so on. That's what makes America so goddamn beautiful. And it needs to be done to a different extent, like way further. There needs to be way more diversity and division in the law, in the people, in the rights and everything based upon individual counties. They should be able to set their laws so drastically different that It allows for everyone who wants to live a certain lifestyle would have certain laws their way, or the way the criminal justice system works functions their way, in accordance with that law, or in accordance with their mentality. And you know what? You might think this would just make America more divided, right? Allowing for this level of political diversity based upon county, based upon these individual territories. But dude, people are already really divided. And they wouldn't hate other people or even judge them or even care when they got what they want, because they're already living the type of lifestyle they want to see. They've always wanted to have, or wanted to for a long amount of time anyway. And doesn't mean, since this is the U.S., okay, it doesn't mean, I want any white enclaves or Native American enclaves or any kind of race, all right? Any, Asian, black, whatever, like Polynesian. I'm not trying to do that because I don't want that kind of division. I do believe, of course, that there should be some ability for, certain societies in a true pan-anarchist world that to exist, right? But talking about what's not too far from what it currently exists in America, I'm not saying anything too extreme yet, or I don't want that to ever happen to America, maybe some like other country or some other thing. But I want there to be unity. I want people of all races in America to be united and not divided and not like socially stratified and all that kind of stuff. And you're not going to get that. You're not going to get that harmony and basic social norms and public respect when your mentality is completely screwed up, when you're justifying being an addict or doing some horrible shit or being addicted to something and being disorderly and all that kind of stuff. You're not going to progress like that. When you accept every different kind of behavior, no matter how horrible, no matter how much it hurts other people, this could be secondhand smoke or it could be anything, okay? Then you can't have equality. You can't. That's universal law, equality. You can't have it because we're not going to be equal when other people are behaving in unequal ways, in ways that are inegalitarian, the opposite of egalitarian towards other people, all right? I didn't consent to breathe in your smoke. I didn't consent for you to be shooting up heroin in a public space, etc. Anything like this. And this is such basic shit. It's not even a left versus right issue. It's just a universal preference for decent social norms to persist. And maybe some behaviors, shocking as it is, some social behaviors should be stigmatized. It's kind of like there's a reason that stigma exists, because you have to look at the things that are socially acceptable or shouldn't be or whatever, and you have to say that's bad. There's good behavior and there's bad behavior. Being an egalitarian isn't looking at all behaviors equally and saying that's all okay. If that were okay, then I guess racism is okay, despite the fact that racism is the most anti-egalitarian thing you can even imagine. So that's the whole point. You have to stigmatize certain behaviors, certain acts, certain ways of thinking, certain ways of interacting with the world. And that's how you have an egalitarian world, an egalitarian society. That's how you have actual equality when people aren't constantly fighting, conflicted with each other. All right? They're not at each other's throats, racially or politically or socially or whatever. You have to have some kind of unity. You have to have some kind of culture. You have to have a strong sense of belonging to a country, belonging to America. And the first step to doing this, okay, is stigma. A lot of stigma. Okay? So, you can bring all the horses to as many pawns as you want, but at the end of the day, you can't do much else. But what you can do, you can change yourself. You can take self-responsibility, and that means wanting to do what you want for other people in your own life. Doing the things that are right for you, and then setting an example for other people to follow. Being the best version of yourself. Shocking, but that's the truth. That is the best strategy that can be done. Because those who don't accept help for their addictions or their horrible behavior, they can't really be helped. What we need to do is say, hey, there should be some laws criminalizing certain behaviors, allowing different societies for different laws and all that kind of stuff. Territories based upon county or city. And what's wrong with that? Nothing in the goddamn world is wrong with that.